All right, thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to speak at this the Omaha user group. So thank you very much. Let me get my screen sharing on here. And so today we're going to talk about using Azure and how to build a defense in-depth security posture. So I'm going to be going through some different services with go through a high-level overview of what a defense in-depth security posture might look like, and then go through some services within Azure that can help to secure and build some security best practices within the Azure cloud. And then once we're done, I'm going to show you a couple of those services and how we can govern and monitor our security posture within the Azure portal. So as Vabev said, I'm Dwayne Natwick. I'm actually out of Michigan, so the other side of the Great Lakes, from Minnesota, but with same general region. We don't get quite as bitterly cold, but we still get cold. We still get the cold Canadian air like Minnesota does. I'm an Azure MVP as well as a cloud training architect lead for Opsagility, and we, as a company, we provide instructor-led training services around specifically for the most part Azure, as well as we author and create our own labs and build our own product structure, and we do a lot of open hack and partner bootcamp services that we build and coach for Microsoft as well. So really strong in Microsoft as a company. And myself, I have multiple Azure and Microsoft 365 role-based certifications. I'm also a Microsoft certified trainer and a regional lead for that program. I'm active on social media at my blog site, captainhyperscaler.com, LinkedIn, as well as on Twitter. And I actually do run my own Microsoft Azure and 365 user group out of the Midwest as well. So what we're going to go through today is, like I said, I'm going to give a high-level overview of some of the data challenges around security and accessibility, and really talk about the key features around having data accessible, available, have it confidential, make sure it maintains its integrity, and that it maintains its compliance to different regulatory requirements. And then we're going to talk a little bit deeper into each of the services then that Azure provides for each of those areas before we go then into the Azure portal and kind of look at some of the ways that we can do that and monitor and govern those areas. So let's talk about some of those challenges. Key thing around security and around building our security posture and building our best practices is really, first and foremost, understanding our threats. And our threats come from internal as well as external. Usually internal, they might not necessarily be threats, but they're vulnerabilities that could lead to something that's going to threaten any kind of exposure of data. One of the key ones to take out of this slide is shadow IT, and understanding, that users want to have access to their information when they want to access it. And we'll talk about that in a minute. And if they don't have access based on how we're providing them ways to gain access, if they're not satisfied with that, they generally find ways around they're going to do it, and that's where shadow IT gets born. We also then have different areas like patch vulnerabilities, elevated privileges, giving people the administrative privileges when they don't necessarily need them to perform their job, and things of that nature. Leaving open development management backdoors after a application development goes into production. And then we have also like perimeter threats, like leaving doors open and leaving passwords out in the open and things like that might cause issues. And then some of those go into then the external threats as well, such as vulnerability exploits or identity spoofing and things like that. But we also have the other external threats like denial of service attacks, injection attacks, and different brute force attacks that might take place within your environment. And OWASP puts together a really nice list of to understand those attacks, and to that you can really research and understand what those attacks are and how you can put controls in place to avoid these types of external attacks. And once you have identified then your threats, one of the key things is building that security posture. And this slide really goes into really what defense in depth is. And usually most attacks, if you even notice from the previous slide, like vulnerability exploits or identity spoofing, they're usually one-off type attacks. So that's why you build a defense in depth. If you're just protecting one thing, like you're protecting identity and access, and you're ignoring the other layers of security, you're going to be very easy to for an attacker to exploit you and to take advantage of that vulnerability. If you build a strong defense in depth strategy, you're going to be able to generally keep most attackers out, because most attackers aren't going to go through all of those layers of protection. I like to use the example, if anybody's ever seen the first Die Hard movie. In the first Die Hard movie, they're trying to go through these 7 layers of the safe to get to the what's inside of the vault. And that's what defense in depth really is. And yeah, in that particular movie, bad example, that particular group was making sure that they got through all 7 layers, but they had a guy, that was drilling through they had a drill that was going through the vault. They had a IT guy that was taking care of breaking through different encryptions and different internet locks or different locks within the computer systems, and they were going through an awful lot just to get through that vault. Most attackers that are out there trying to find exploits, they're looking for quick fixes. They're looking to get in, get out, and gain the information that they want and be done with it. They're not looking to spend an entire day trying to get through all of these different parameters. They're going to look for one exploit, a specific exploit that they're going to be looking at, such as, say, an RDP 3389 port that's open, or an SSH 22 port on a Linux device, and just scan for that and then try to exploit that. Try and use, common passwords and common admin names. And if they aren't successful doing that, they're just going to move on. So having those different defenses in depth, in terms of your physical security, which really is taken in the Azure cloud, is really Microsoft's responsibility. But then you have like identity and access, perimeter security, network security, compute, applications, and all the way down to how you're protecting your data is really what we're talking about here in terms of our defense in depth posture. And I kind of put in place here just as a placeholder to kind of bring it all into focus for everybody, is how do you secure your house? You don't just have a front door with a set of keys to get into your house. You generally have a garage door opener, a garage door and a garage door opener. You have a deadbolt lock on your door, not just a single lock. You have internal doors where each individual in your house might also have a lock on their door where they can get their own security. You have lock boxes for your jewelry and your financial records, and then you also might have alarm systems or generators that are utilized for monitoring that area, as well as keeping your alarm systems, or just even your general lights for protection on within your environment. And all these kind of, if you look at the way that kind of goes into play within your own home type environment, and your situation that you build your own protection in your house, it's very similar to cyber defense, and how you build those layers of defense and those layers of protection to make you feel safe and secure within your own home. And I alluded to this a little bit a couple slides ago when I was talking about the physical layer of that defense in depth strategy, that within within an Azure environment or any cloud environment, that's generally going to be the cloud provider's responsibility. And that's what this slide kind of tells you and kind of shows you, if you're not familiar with the shared responsibility model, how security and responsibility for certain areas of the environment take place are different based on what type of service you're consuming within the environment. When you have your on-premises data center, generally you're going to be handling all of those parameters, all of those layers of defense, where you're going to have your physical building, your physical data center, your physical locks and monitoring within your environment, and then you're going to have your physical hosts, your server, your virtual machines that are on those hosts. You're going to have the operating systems, all the network and security controls, the application controls, all the way up to your information and data. And as you move across this slide, for whether you're just spinning up a infrastructure as a service type virtual machine within the environment, you have more control and less responsibility is on Microsoft. But as you move over into platform services, and as Nick was saying about Farm Credit having an application within the Azure environment, they might be using Azure App Services, which from a compute standpoint, Microsoft's managing and handling all of those updates and all the security controls of the actual compute environment, and you're really only required to secure the APIs and the data and everything that's going through that application at that point. And then you get into software as a service type environments, where now you're really just managing the identity and the data, and that's like Microsoft 365, where it's just a consumer-based product that you're purchasing per user, and you have control to secure the user identity and how your data is handled within that environment. But everything else from the processing and compute down is now Microsoft's responsibility. But the one thing that still remains the same is there's still that defense in depth through that. It just requires what Microsoft is providing and what you're providing. And a key thing that I like to point out in this slide here is these gray areas here in the middle, especially with platform services. With platform services, Microsoft takes on a lot more responsibility around securing data and securing the compute environment. But there's certain levels of security that are still on you as the consumer or enterprise to evaluate and to determine whether you're going to turn on some extra security controls, because that's what you need to be compliant and things like that. And we'll talk more about that as we go through more of this presentation. I like to talk about the influencing factors a little bit, and I talked about this a little bit already, where there's this tug of war, this give and take between users and the organization, where the users, the user environment wants to have access to files, access to that application when they need it, how they need it, but the organization wants to maintain the integrity of that information, maintain that availability, but also secure that access, have that confidentiality of sensitive data, and maintain compliance. And how we all work together as both an organization and users to maintain that is how we work together jointly as a company and as an environment to protect our organization, both our personal data as well as our corporate data. So let's talk a little bit more about data accessibility and availability. So key things around this to cover is just to understand that most users are going to want data to be accessed, and think of the way that you deal with and work in your daily life. You want to be able to access your information and be able to work from multiple sources. I generally am working from a laptop, a phone, a smartphone, a tablet, and I want to have availability to my data when needed. But it's important to have secure access to, and be able as an organization to have the management capability to secure that unauthorized data and maintain then that principle of least privilege, where you're not accessing data you're not supposed to, where a user might access that data, might download that data, and then that data is compromised if for some reason their identity gets compromised or their phone or tablet gets stolen. And that's something that as an organization you need to protect against. And so how do we do that? And how is that done within the Azure environment? We'll talk about a few different services here that can help to do that. And we'll just talk about them really at a high level today. I do some more detailed talks, and there's some talks that I've done with some other MVPs out in the Azure community around that have gone a little bit deeper into some of these. So, but identity management is really the first and foremost at this point when you're talking about cloud environments. Identity is what we have the largest amount of control over, and how we're managing who has access to what, how we're accessing it with utilizing like multi-factor authentication. I don't have a use case that I can think of where you shouldn't use multi-factor authentication in one way or another in your business life as well as your daily life. I use an example all the time of my daughter, who is a teenager, had her Amazon account compromised, and she didn't have multi-factor authentication on there. Somebody hacked her Amazon account, took her Amazon account, changed her password, and changed the shipping address to a port in Miami. And thankfully, she didn't have a credit card on there. She had a gift card. But it was a hassle to just get Amazon to open that account back up so we could put multi-factor on it. And then they also were nice enough to give her back her gift card that she had gotten for her birthday. But lesson learned there: make sure that on any account that you have sensitive information, like I said, like shopping sites with credit cards and things like that, having multi-factor authentication is going to save you a lot of trouble. My son, another example, my son had his Roblox account. He's a little younger, so he doesn't do online shopping, but he had his Roblox account hacked, and somebody took control of his Roblox account. So we had to fix that, and then we put multi-factor authentication on that, so that if somebody tries to take his account again and steal whatever he's accumulated on there, then they can't do that, because they don't have that now access to my email account where the code gets sent when he goes to log in. So those are some key things around multi-factor authentication and some lessons learned and things to live by there. Conditional access takes it a step further, and Microsoft 365 has in their preview licenses conditional access, where it will actually look at different conditions that the user or the devices are in, whether they're in a IP address within a that is seen by Microsoft as a dangerous location, or maybe your device is missing certain critical security updates and require then additional form of verification, like changing your password and utilizing multi-factor authentication, or just blocking access completely and utilizing those things. Privileged identity management is a way to avoid giving people permanent administrator rights, and therefore decreasing the attack surface that an attacker might have for gaining administrative privilege within your environment. You give them a time-based administrative rights to do the job that they need to do at the time they need to do it, and then those rights are taken away until they request them again. And that it's very helpful from that standpoint to, again, continue that principle of least privilege and manage your identity in a much more logical way, and while also decreasing your attack surface. Some things around storage accounts, as we talk about data and securing data, it's important to have, have storage accounts and have replication, understanding the difference between replication and backup. Storage accounts within Azure are encrypted at rest, but they aren't necessarily encrypted in transit. You have to turn on the utilization of HTTPS for access to files on storage accounts, which is definitely a good practice. Another good practice is to not have anonymous access to storage accounts. The only time I would say you want to create a storage account that that anybody has access to would be if it's just images for your website, for example, or for your application. If it's images, it's fine. If it's actual information and data, have it not be anonymous and utilize shared access signatures, which really gives, again, similar to privileged identity management, it provides a time-based access that you can determine what they can do with that access, whether they can just read it, whether they can add to a storage account, whether they can delete files on a storage account or modify those. You can give, so if you're working on a project with somebody or you're working with your accountant needs a balance sheet, look at your corporate balance sheet, you can give them access to that file for 24, 48 hours, and then that signature expires and nobody then can access it. So that key, so you're not exposing any keys or anything that's going to expose that data long term to potential attackers. For protecting data that needs to be retained on a long-term basis, there's soft delete within storage accounts, which is very helpful. It's essentially like a recycle bin on your desktop where you delete the file and you can determine how long that stays there, so it protects against an accidental deletion of a file. And then there's data lifecycle management, where if you have certain retention periods that data needs to be held, say 7 years for tax purposes, you can set up automated data lifecycle management within your environment as well for moving. And it helps from a regulatory and standards-based approach, but it also helps to help with costs as well, because you can move from hot storage to cold storage to archive storage and decrease the amount of data decrease the cost of your data as well. So it's kind of a twofold benefit there. And database protection, around protecting databases, again, replication is key. Utilizing multiple data centers, multiple availability zones, multiple geographies around where you're storing your data can help to protect your environment and maintain availability. Elastic pools, as well as, again, encryption. Having whether you're going to encrypt all of your data at rest, which is standard, but also different transparent data encryption and encryption capabilities around data masking and things like that, which we'll talk about actually in around when we get into the confidentiality section. And then there's a lot of advanced threat protection as well that we can talk about, and mostly advanced threat protection has now been rebranded as of Microsoft Ignite to Microsoft Defender ATP. But what this does is it monitors the user behaviors. It protects identities. It reduces attack surfaces by identifying suspicious activities and helps you investigate alerts and activities, and utilizes what Microsoft has built in terms of machine learning and cognitive services capabilities to identify these activities and say, hey, something isn't right here. And some of those, for example, understanding impossible travel and understanding that, hey, somebody logged in from the UK and 5 minutes later they logged in from New York City. That's not right. They can't travel, they can't travel time that quickly. So something's wrong here, and create an alert. So something, where something could be not right. So On top of accessibility and availability, now we get into the confidentiality, integrity, and compliance of information, which is really what the organization probably is the from a sensitivity standpoint the most concerned about. And they want to identify and make sure sensitive data is categorized. You want to make sure as an organization that you have your data categorized and know what that sensitive data is, and keep that confidential from unauthorized users, and having only authorized users be able to view it, and then make sure that the integrity piece is making sure that it hasn't been compromised. And then on top of that, obviously certain organizations have compliance and regulatory standards that they need to uphold as well. So what can you do in terms of the Azure environment to do that, to handle this confidentiality, integrity, and compliance? And one of those things is around key management. Microsoft has in Azure the Azure Key Vault, which helps to keep, if anybody within a highly regulated organization has to have the key, your keys and segregation of duty of your keys from the cloud provider services, Azure Key Vault can help you do that, because it'll store has the ability to store your secrets and your resource keys within Key Vault, rather than having to utilize the Azure provided keys within like your storage services, where they might get exposed or compromised. Another key thing around key management is that it helps to rotate those secrets. And one of the key things around Key Vault that's really nice is for your websites, for your certificates, for your different intranet and internet websites, they can also manage the life cycle of those certificates and renew those certificates automatically, rather than you having to keep track of when you have to rotate certificates and renew those. Information protection provides that data classification, the ability to provide labels on information for sensitivity, creating those sensitivity labels, as well as set up different rights management and understanding who has access to what or who can view what. And this is one of those services that the users have a little bit of play in, because they can label a document working in Microsoft 365. They can label a document or an email sensitive when they have information protection turned on as well. So they have some say in what's confidential as well. So if you have a C-level person that's working in Microsoft and they're working on a very confidential document, they can tag it as such. So then people that only have access to that level of information within their roles can then see those documents. And then a little bit more about database protection that I didn't mention before that goes along with that confidentiality is the ability to dynamically data mask. Some things around advanced threat protection within databases allows you to can recognize within your databases data that's social security numbers or PII or PHI within those environments, and can then mask that information from people that should not have access to it and not be able to view it. So if a sales manager or if an HR person can view somebody's social security number, they have that role that when they pull that information up in their database, they can see that. But if a general user goes into their own HR portal, they can see their social security number, but nobody else's, or it's masked for the last 4 digits or something like that. Sensitive personal information for customers and for patients, such as email addresses and phone numbers, can be masked. Different things like that have capabilities within the environment. You can then also do, with the advanced protection for databases, vulnerability assessments within your database, and also do data discovery and automated classification of your environment. So it helps with that overall compliance within your databases within Azure to protect sensitive data within the organization for, like I said, your users, your organization, as well as your customers. And we're going to talk and show more about this when we go into the portal, but Azure Policy helps to bridge those responsibility gaps when we're talking about shared responsibility. It helps you to implement levels of compliance and audit on those compliance standards and those policies and initiatives that that will help you to govern your environment. And that's going to be one of the key things that we're going to show here in a couple minutes. Azure Security Center is another thing that we're going to touch on. So I'm just going to hit it with a broad brush here on the slides. But some things on Azure Security Center that you can do is you can put in place update management. You can review policies. You review your levels of compliance and controls around the environment. You can look at your levels of identity and access management and multi-factor authentication and look at recommendations, find some rich recommendations that are going to show you from a best practice approach how you can then build that strong defense in-depth security posture. And and just to kind of summarize, here, what we want to do in terms of security and compliance and how we're going to build that defense in depth is to continually review, the policies and compliance, and that's what we're going to look at in a moment, and monitor for best practice controls, review network topologies and traffic for potential threats. Continue to keep an eye on what's going on. Don't lose sight of what's happening in your environment is a key there, as well as monitoring utilizing monitors and alerts against advanced threat analysis and global threat intelligence that Microsoft provides and Microsoft utilizes and essentially gives to you within the environment, because they don't want anybody compromising their environment either. So a lot of that are pieces that come with going into the Microsoft ecosystem. You get that from a standpoint of not just within the Azure environment, but you have capabilities to extend that out to your hybrid environment. So let's take a look at a couple of those last couple things. I wanted to show both the Security Center. I'm going to show policies a little bit and show as well the Azure Sentinel a little bit also. So you guys are seeing the Azure portal, correct? Just to make sure.
Yes, we can see that.
Okay, just making sure I wasn't sharing my application and not my full screen. So cool. So we're in Azure Security Center, very easy to get to. You can go up here and type Security Center and find it. Have it, it's something I go to rather regularly, so it's right here. They've made some really interesting changes to this with at Ignite. They changed some of these tiles and it makes it a little bit easier to follow actually, and brought in more around Azure Defender. But some of the key things to understand on Azure Security Center and how we're building our defense in depth posture is we can look immediately here and look at our secure score based on Microsoft's best practices for having controls in place. If we have specific regulatory compliance that we're trying to adhere to, we have that right here in a dashboard as well. There are some standard ones that Microsoft turns on within Security Center automatically, but you can go right in here and you can actually add other controls. One of the, ISO 27001 is an international standard, but if we wanted to add a different control, we could open up managed policies and come in here and say we want to add a different standard. If we're a healthcare company, we can immediately come in here and add very easily HIPAA high trust. And what this all does in the background, and we'll show in a moment, is what it does is it puts in place a Azure policy initiative against all of your resources and the controls that go around that compliance. And then you can see where you stand on that. So if you've got, say, an ISO 27001 audit that's coming up, you can come in here and you can understand, okay, what do I need to do? I'm failing in identity and access management. Oh, and this is my my one thing that I fail with every one of my demos, because I don't have multi-factor authentication for my demo environment. But if you're in here, you can see, oh, I don't have multi-factor on all of my owner permissions within my subscription. So if I turn that on for the one resource that I'm failing, I then maintain my compliance. So I can really get myself ready for a regulatory audit utilizing Azure Security Center. And a lot of this, like I said, like virtual machines, you could utilize this for not just Azure virtual machines, but virtual machines in your on-premises data center too. All you need to do is put a monitoring agent. It all works around Azure Monitor. You put an Azure monitoring agent in place, and that will pull everything that you need into Security Center. Another nice thing around Security Center, again, is these insights over here on the right, as well as a secure score. The secure score and insights are kind of similar, where it's going to show you some best practice recommendations in here to help increase your level of security and compliance and score to best practices within the Azure environment based on what other organizations do and things like that. And again, I've got MFA. I'm a little half compliant on that. Some other things here in terms of vulnerabilities. I should do a vulnerability assessment, have vulnerability assessments enabled on virtual machines. And some of the things you find here is you can find here that this is a quick fix. So I could very easily select these virtual machines, trigger the remediate immediately, and go from there. Otherwise, if it does not have these quick fixes in here, and let me find one that does not, like system updates on virtual machines, it will actually show you what you need to do to remediate those steps. And you can, it just says identify the outstanding updates. It will tell you affected resources. Let's find another one that's a little bit, let's look at MFA and the remediation steps. So this is a little bit more detailed step here. It shows you here. It gives you a couple different options here, whether you're going to remediate using conditional access. And this will take you right to the Microsoft doc that's going to tell you how to do that. So very helpful tools within Security Center to build that defense in depth strategy, build your best practices around security controls within your environment by just utilizing this tool. The inventory here, and you can see based on the inventory, healthy resources. You're going to get a lot of the same things when you go in here in terms of, and it's going to look more at a resource level, but you have it again at a subscription level. Again, you can see recommendations, past and things that have passed what's healthy in the environment versus different recommendations in your subscription that you can do to make things more secure. And if I take this back then, if I go back and kind of take this down to a more granular level of what, from a compliance standpoint, what we're doing, and that gets us into Azure policy a little bit. And you can see here, right when I get to the dashboard, I have 3 policies enabled in here. I've set up the foundation, the Microsoft Azure foundational benchmark for security within here, and I'm 67% compliant in here. So I have some ways to go. I've got 21 non-compliant resources failing on 33 different policies, and as well as I have, these are my Azure Security Center subscription policies. So when you enable and turn on Security Center, these turn on automatically. So I have my Defender pieces on here, as well as my Security Center subscription. And if we go here to the definitions, this is where you can understand and gain a little bit more insight around what it's doing here. And you can see what you find in Azure policy is 2 things. You find policies and you find initiatives. And the way that you can tell the difference between the 2 is an initiative is just a group of policies. And you can see here, depending on the initiative. So like say, if you're looking at HIPAA or high trust, there's 121 different policies that go into that, and you can click down further and you can view what those policies are, which ones they are. You can determine which ones might be important to you. Ultimately, if you're a healthcare provider organization, they all should be important, because you should try and put them all in place, because that'll help you pass your next audit. So it not only protects your environment, but it also helps you get in front of those audits rather than paying a consultant thousands of dollars to come in and evaluate your environment, right? And then as we get down lower, I always like to point out here the NIST, the National Security standard for security controls 800-53 has 790 policies within its initiative. So it's pretty huge there. But you can also go in here and you can govern your environment utilizing these policies, or build specific policies. And you can look, and it's not just a security standpoint, you can govern from a cost standpoint as well. So if you want to just, and even from a sovereignty, a location sovereignty standpoint, you can set up within certain resource groups only certain allowed locations. And I'm not going to go deep into it, but you can pick, that only in this resource group, these are only US based data centers. Within this resource group, it's European data centers. Within this resource group, it's APAC data centers, so that you can maintain then the data sovereignty requirements based on different countries as well, like GDPR and things like that. You can manage and maintain those things as well. You can also manage and maintain costs from here as well by only allowing certain virtual machine SKUs within here, which is outside the realm of talking about defense in depth and security posture, but there's a lot you can do with policies. And when you are looking at policies, you can run compliance, run compliance against it, run and remediate those within Azure Policy, as well as within Security Center. You also have that capability by looking at your secure score, looking at the best practice recommendations, and utilizing that as your main source of truth. And the last thing I wanted to hit on was also Azure Sentinel, which is a rather new service within the last year around providing security and providing rich security event information and event management, or if those of you that are around IT and security operations centers or SOCs, a SIM offering that's cloud-based and allows you then to, I mentioned the threat intelligence mapping. You can look for malicious events here utilizing Microsoft's threat intelligence database. You can look for anomalies on different activities and usage, as well as look here in terms of different activities and what's going on within your environment and what might be causing an alert within the environment. I don't have any alerts right now. I have different events from logging in and creating resources, but nothing from a standpoint to be worried about. But if I saw that I had some alerts and some incidents created, then I can go and investigate those incidents. And you can create and connect different data sources, not just from an Azure environment, and you can really stand up what would ultimately be a SOC very quickly utilizing Azure Sentinel and all of these data sources. If you're utilizing Amazon Web Services, you can connect it directly to CloudTrail very easily by following these steps within here and following these prerequisites and going in and following Microsoft Docs on what you need to do within AWS CloudTrail and what you need to do in Azure Sentinel to get that all connected. And it works, and you can do that with many different third-party services, Cisco ASAs in here, Cisco WAF, different. I think there's, we got F5s in here. I think they're Palo Alto. So all of the main service, main security vendors are already kind of in here as well. So if you're not using a SIM today, Azure Sentinel is a good quick route to get to that point of monitoring and investigating your security events to protect and monitor your environment. So that's about it for today. I think we're doing good on time, and hopefully, threw a lot of information at you. But feel free to, I'm happy to, if you have any questions now or questions afterwards, reach out to me on social media. But hopefully, everybody has a really good idea of and good foundational thoughts around how you go about building a defense in depth strategy and what services Microsoft has around providing a secure and available environment, and while maintaining all the integrity and confidentiality and compliance that you need within your organization.
Absolutely, and I think the most common misconception I've heard of is what people believe is if they are moving their applications to Azure or any public cloud, it's the onus on the cloud provider to keep their application secure. But people have to start understanding that it's a shared responsibility model, where part of the security is a responsibility of the provider and part of the responsibility lies on the consumer.
Yeah, and one of the key things that I point out to people that say, well, if Microsoft says that they have a HIPAA compliant infrastructure or they're PCI compliant, so if I put my application there, I'm PCI compliant. No, there's, like you said, there's a responsibility that you have to take control over that. But Microsoft gives you a lot of the tools that you just need to turn on, and Azure Security Center helps you get there and do that.
Right. I don't see any questions on the chat window. I would like to give this opportunity to all the attendees. If anyone would like to ask anything to Dwayne, please feel to do so.
Yeah. Hi, Vaibhav. This is Shrikant.
Yeah, go ahead, Shrikant.
Hi, Dwayne.
Yes.
Thank
hello.
you so much. Yeah, thank you so much for your informative session, which gives a overall idea about the defense in depth. It's very useful for me. I am planning to attempt my AZ500 exam next month. Okay. Would you give you any suggestions for who are preparing for that exam?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of the services that I covered on this presentation really come right out of that exam. I teach that course quite a bit, and understanding. Defense and understanding the defense in depth and all of those services around this are extremely important to that exam, as well as I didn't really touch on zero trust. I hit it at a high level when I was talking about identity management, and talking about multi-factor authentication a little bit, but that's a key thing. Identity is really a key point and a key area of AZ500 and the zero trust model. Don't trust anybody. Make everybody constantly verify who they are, and that's really a key thing around security within Azure, around identity management. And really, when I teach the AZ500 class, it's a 4-day class, and the first day is on identity management. It's on all of those things with privileged identity management, hybrid identities. Role-based access control, conditional access, all of those pieces that go into continually verifying who people are so that we keep the integrity of our information, and the integrity of who people are is extremely important to know, from just a general standpoint, as well as preparing for that exam.
Okay, thank you so much. And I have one more question. Yeah.
Sure.
Whenever we are looking for the data security, we have considered 3 things. One is data in rest, data in transit, and data in use. I have fair idea on data in rest and data in transit, but I'm always confused about data in use. Could you please explain something about data in use? How do we protect that when data is in use?
A lot of that has to do with, especially different services like always on encryption in databases, and the information protection pieces, where that's really what that protection of data in use is really. It has a lot to do with that dynamic data masking and making sure that data isn't exposed to people when they access that data, it's recognizing the levels of access they're going to have is really what that protection of that data in use is, and as well as making sure that maybe if a user doesn't have shouldn't be printing that information, that they aren't printing that information or they're not downloading that information. That's really what all comes down to, that data in use, that when it's being used, it's not creating any kind of exposure or any type of way for it to walk away, so to speak.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Jay. Thanks so
Yep.
much.
Anyone else has anything to ask Dwayne? All right, looks like everyone is good. On behalf of the user group, I would like to thank you once again, Dwayne, for taking out time and talking with us about different in-depth security. I think it's a very important topic which all the Azure consumers should be aware of and should know about. And with that, thank you so much for the presentation.
Oh, you're very welcome. Anytime.